now it is my pleasure to introduce Doug Major, a good friend and colleague of mine. He'll be talking about cerebellar contributions to vision. We're excited to hear it.
Excuse me, I had an infusion the other day, and so I'm still on prednisone. So if you get a fire hose, it's going to be a fire hose. I'll have plenty of time to talk later about that. And let's get the buttons here. And again, just welcome. So we're talking about the cerebellum and eye movements. And you know, when I learned about the cerebellum, I was just given the really basics, the ABCs. Cerebellum is just that little part of the brain in the back that they stuck on. We don't really know much about accuracy, balance, and coordination. And it was always hidden. We always learned, when we learned the cranial nerve, they always cut it off. You know, it's like those, they just cut it off. You know, you can see they just cut off of the peduncles. You just get it out of the picture. And of course, cerebellar agenesis, meaning you don't even have a cerebellum, you're still alive. So it can't be that important, right? It just can't be that important. Sherrington, of course, who we work with, anything with neurology, call it just the head ganglion of the proprioceptive system, just a bunch of neurons at the top. And he talks about, you know, to move things is what mankind can do. And I'm going to talk a little bit about some specific proprioceptive stimulation, upregulation cases. You know, the power, just to give you a feeling of the power of precision stimulation, motor and sensory. And I think we got Allison here as a great example right here. So we got, but here's some people that I've met personally through my experience. Kevin Ballister. Now Calvin's really interesting because you can see he's doing these backflips. So Calvin realized that if he went in a pool and did 2-3 backflips in a row, his vision and his spatial world got better. Self-stimulation. We did a really interesting presentation on this. Olympic hopeful Kevin Pierce. Kevin Pierce, of course, was a snowboarder, got a really severe brain injury, was searching for a place. He found that during just doing meditation, things got better. So he knew that if he could find the right sensory input, that would improve his life. And he found that through Mind Eye, got some specialized glasses that he called glasses from hell. But he said after he was done, we saw the end result. We give a presentation that his prism went away. He was actually seeing 20/20, and his life changed. He had to get rid of the girlfriend that was a disabled girlfriend that labeled him as disabled. He moved on with his life. No, this is more than just fixing the double vision. Of course, our guru here, Clark Elliott, the amazing ability to not only decrease symptomology, but to bring back cognition after 9 years. Can you imagine, as a computer expert, not being involved, can't get involved, coming back after 9 years and reestablishing his connection and his research? And this is sort of a fun one. This is not a person, this is a personal patient who was with Billy Joel on that first big conference. He went to Ukraine, or USSR, back to the USSR, and he had to say, he said, Doug, I got to confide something to you. He said, my double vision's terrible, but when I make love with my wife, everything's great for a few hours. Right stimulation, right time is just so important, right? So what we're going to be going through today is 3 little areas, new research on cerebellum, and some I just came up last week. Triad of interests in the cerebellum, particularly Dr. Z, who is the guru of cerebellum and eye movements. And of course, the main thing is the new diagnostic tools and their possible clinical applications. What really made me excited about this, because again, I just had the ABCs. I went to a academy meeting and they showed this. See, in optometry, we look a lot about eye movement, particularly convergence. That's our big thing. And so after convergence insufficiency, they found that the big change happened in the vermis. I didn't know what that was. That's in the cerebellum. And guess what changes the most? After vision therapy, the vermis changes the most in response to therapy. So, and what else does the cerebellum do? You know, it's, you know, we think of just as movement, but you know, this idea of dysmetria through thought. And so cerebellum changes the vestibular, but also cognition, emotion, autonomic function. It is connected with that superior peduncle all the way to the top. And then of course, this is next door. We got all these military people. They're talking about PTSD. Where does change occur during PTSD? It changes in the cerebellum. Isn't it just amazing? So the other thing I learned here while I was here, that it's always fun to get these isolated things. So I'm giving you some isolated things, so maybe you'll remember one thing. Well, we had somebody who came back and said, we are evolutionary set to our star. I don't know if you remember that. It was really cool. And I thought, yes, we're set to our own Kelvin, to our own star, with its oscillations and wave movements. And we're finely tuned to our star, the sun. And if we were next to Beetlejuice or something, we'd be a whole different type of person. And this is brand new. So here's the energy comes down as light, and guess what? The segments of our photoreceptors change. They're actually vibrating and changing. And then look at the oscillation patterns in the cerebellum. We've got all these different oscillation patterns connected to the sun, connected to theta. And so when you start thinking about this, our cerebellum is intimately connected to everything we do. Now, as optometrists, we've been involved with this for a while. There's a group called the right eye, and every time we do a right eye assessment, it would over 90%, the cerebellum would pick up to show there was something wrong because it's associated with, of course, eye movements. Now, Jam's just next door. We got him going. He talked yesterday. So this was sort of where it all came together. Last year, Jam presented at the COVD. I was able to be involved with him up at Stanford at a brain concussion meeting, just so kind to having us be able to put our research with his. We just put together a paper in December. If you want to talk about the history of development of something, Jam was the one that started the Brain Trauma Foundation, Save the Woman Central Park. Very fascinating way science develops, and he got to the point of his big thing was he found out that white matter is disrupted in that superior peduncle, and that's where brain injury occurs. So his big thing was coma. He went to Stanford to identify the things with mild brain injury, concussion, and so as he was talking yesterday, he said the brain has this major problem. The brain's present is in the past. In other words, it takes a while for neuroprocessing. During that time, when that clock hits, we want to be in real time. It's impossible for us to be in the present. How do we do it? We have to predict the future and to interact with the present to experience the past. So there has to be some neural mechanism as a predictor. Where is that mechanism? Well, in the human brain, of course, we've got this cerebellum that has the majority of the neurons, 70 billion, 4 times that of the neocortex. And even though we think of the neocortex, and again, I'm not discounting frontal eye field and all those other things, but today, the star of the cerebellum. So we're talking about the cerebellum. It doesn't mean that other things are not important. But the interesting thing that Jam points out is that during evolution, as our frontal got less, the cerebellum got more. Why? Because the cerebellum allows us to be in the now. It frees up our neocortex, so it doesn't have to worry about those reflective things, and we can reflect in the future. And so, more brain cells, better prediction. 75% of brain cells are these granule cells in the cerebellum that have to do with timing. As we grow, 80% of the growth happens in the cerebellum area for our brain during those critical periods as we interact with space and time, right? And so I was taught, how do we grow developing? Well, we have myelinization and pruning, right? We have all those cells, but maybe we should talk about granulization, right? Because this huge number of new cells that are a part of the predictive timing. And Jam goes so far, and I would agree with him, that when we get to the point at age 2 or 3, that we start to understand that when I do things in time, I'm connected with time. That's how we develop our self, right? That's our self. We develop our idea of self as the predictive state, and I'll let you go deeper into this as we go on. This was something else I learned here at the conference last year, is that the cerebellum doesn't connect with the what is it system. It's the where is it and the when is it system. No direct connections. That's why it's free for being more reflective, right? And so there's these no functional links, and again, and this idea of velocity, remember we're still talking about movement, but velocity in space and time, the cerebellum puts us in that right situation. And again, no functional links between the primary cortex and the cerebellum. That frees it up to be this great where is it system that we need. Just last, this is like 2 months ago, they're finally getting the idea. We're trying to codify this so anytime ataxia, that cerebellar, And now there's actually a code that shows to rate eye movements during ataxia. So it's fascinating. Again, this is really starting to catch on. And if you go to a meeting now, there's hundreds of articles, hundreds of posters on cerebellum. Now here we go to the plaque. So now Dr. Z is the guru of cerebellum, and so he talks about this. The cerebellum works as this network hub to optimize eye movements through its mutual connections. And we're going to talk about 3 different areas. And I'm going to help you with a little mnemonic here. So the flocculus, parathloculus, tonsils, right? You feel our tonsils. The uvula, that's that little punching bag. And then the dorsal verbus we talked about, and the vestibular nucleus, the FOR. These are the primary areas when we think of maybe the hard palate. And he says, even though there's no absolute compartmentalization of function, these areas all work together. And so I love this Venn diagram because you see what's in the middle, smooth eye movements. Smooth eye movements is the thing that's the bridge between all the different things. And then I love this idea. Unless you see a patient within seconds after neurological onset, any abnormalities will reflect not only immediate damage, but the attempt of the cerebellum to repair the problem. The cerebellum is repairing the problem before you can even find the problem, right? You think about that, what are we shooting for? This is plasticity on steroids. Is this an organ we want to be involved with that can change so rapidly? My goodness. So eye movements are, again, easily observed clinically and measured and quantified. Now, unfortunately, Dr. Z looks at it just to identify them, to name them. Oh, this is this problem, this problem. I love this portion. This information will assist develop better algorithms and novel treatments, including rehabilitation programs. And that's what we're going to be talking about today, the rehabilitation part. If you look under Z, on PubMed, you'll see all these things. But these lists are getting longer and longer and longer about the localization there. What now? Oh my goodness. Okay, so I'll be fine. I appreciate the work of these 2 people. They developed an app called Focus Builder that utilizes this idea, and they're very kind about sharing their information. So let's talk about the semicircular canals. Yes, no, roll, that's the triad. We often forget, though, the otolith system. That's Bob Pepper, who's a special optometrist. Bob goes up and down. He was a trampoline guy. Weave side to side, lunge back and forth. That's otolith stimulation. And then, of course, the 3 places in the back of the brain, the spirochelicus for visual, auditory, and anti-gravity or vestibular for the inferior chelicus. And then, remember, look what's right below that. The cerebellum has all that input that helps. So we got the 3 areas. Think of the hard palate. Put your tongue on the top of your mouth. Okay, there you go. That's our FOR. You still got your tonsil. I can sort of feel mine back there. That's your flocculus, paraflocculus, and that little punching bag, the uvula. So I just did this so you get an idea. And see, when the anatomists saw this, obviously when they looked inside somebody, when they saw the cerebellum for the first time, they saw these characteristics, and that's why they named them such. And so I also appreciate the work of a functional neurologist, Dr. Cobb. It's again, a lot of these slides are his. So ocular motor things. So if you look up, it facilitates extension. You look down, it facilitates flexion, right and left. Eye movements drive the system. And it's so fascinating to me, the different areas. Why aren't all the eye muscles coming from the same place? Well, because you've got the flexors in the top of the brain, or the midbrain. Then you got the trochlear area that's the maximum flexor, go in and down. And then you've got the abducen that has to be way down here in the extension area, because what does the abducen do? It is up and out, right? So the connection with mind, our body, and eye muscles are just so important. And so remember, the cerebellum has these maps, has 75% of the cortical surface area on top of that. Not just the neurons, but the surface area of these great homunculus. And so the cerebellum is intimately involved with real-time modulation of gaze shifting stabilization for those calibrations we need. And it's so accessible to test, right? If you get a DUI, guess what? Even the police officer knows these tests, right? He's going to be doing the Romberg, the perturbation, the gait, napping, tapping.
Everybody should have some tests for their cerebellum assessment because it works so well. And Deanne just left, but she just came up just when we were starting this. She has her own little cerebellar eye movement. You can get that online. So if you want to go deeper on some of the other things, she's got an hour-long thing. I think it's $10. And this is what she shared with me. This idea of the different symptoms. Now remember, the cerebellum, vestibular cerebellum, that's what we're talking about, dizziness, disorientation. Remember, that's the oldest part of the whole system, right? And so we can use this by identifying location, but maybe we're also looking at how the actual eye's movement. And then the idea, now we're going to adapt that so we can go ahead and apply this to what we do. So again, think of that hard palate. That's mostly the initial turning on things, and like for saccades, and you're going to go to saccades, right? So we're going to hear a lot about saccades. So we'll leave that to you. But this other thing, again, the flocculus, think about the tonsils. That has to do with looking and fixating off to the side, and what's called the VOR modification. And then the nodulus and udulus, that's more for translational movement. The cool thing about all this is it's all directional specific. In other words, you can move each side is designed to make one eye move in one direction or the other, so we can utilize that to change our therapies. So here's a question. You got a patient complaining about a muscle strain around their eyes, and while performing smooth pursuits diagonally down to the left. So you decide to activate a reflexive eye movement instead of a voluntary one for the therapy. So how would you do that? So again, this is down to your left. So when it's down to your left, that indicates it's a right posterior canal, so you can move the nose up to the right. So I want this has to be really clear, the idea that when you have a problem with reflexive eye movements, you can use voluntary eye movements to help fix that. If you have problems with voluntary eye movements, you can use reflective eye movements to fix that. We have this system, so we can use both systems as we locate a problem to fix that. And so you can do these drills. So what would that drill be? That would be just that. Yes. And some people will know that would make, just one direction would make you completely ill, on the floor ill, with incorrect stimulation, incorrect precision stimulation can do just the opposite. That's why people are so afraid of this, using this. So again, you can see these things online. So you get an idea of how we should be exploring this on every patient. Retina is the only part of the brain that moves. Eyes should be treated as couple joint to be explored, mapped, and stimulated. Isn't it amazing that the VOR is developed in utero before we're born? It's all fully myelated, and then just like kittens in the womb, we open our eyes and we do VOR exercises, I would suggest, in the womb. So here we go, neurocomponents of this integration. So this is the crazy thing, is that your vestibular spirals are so small, but they give 1 million action potentials a second. And so what happens? Well, here you are, here we're just normal here, and I move my head, and immediately my left canal is uprighted to the point that it just dries my eyes immediately, right? We know that. So same thing, I look to the right, upregulate, my eyes are driven to the left. And of course, that's what we call maybe a VOR stimulation, right? We go back and forth. So let's go a little bit deeper in the FOR region. Well, again, that's going to be speeded up eye movements. I'm going to throw that back because that's going to be saccades. I'll let our next speaker will be talking about that. The point is this, there's the laterality. So you get the idea that the eyes will decelerate out and accelerate down. You think about that, that's where we talk about convergence, right? That's why convergence is in this area. Accelerate down. Okay, so we're going to continue on. So let's talk about the vestibular. Let's do a little smooth pursuit, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and, whoops, am I going the wrong direction? There we go. Anyway, so we'll talk about upregulation. I'll let saccades, we'll talk about that later. I'll let the next speaker talk about that. So let's talk a little bit about fixation. Fixation is really that primary thing that we need to do. We have to look at things. And the cool thing about fixation, a lot of times we just think about fixation looking straight ahead. But therapeutically, we can move our fixation as we look way off to the side and hold it. Guess what holds it there? your head wants to go there. Your cerebellum will hold your eyes off to the side. So we can use just direct fixation to do this. So here's an example too. So you want to, how would you want to stimulate your right half of the cerebellum? Well, you get an idea. You can use your eyes just down to the left or hold your gaze to the right, okay? So it's really fascinating the things we can do to get precision stimulation to help these different areas that we find different. So here we, again, the floccular area, the tonsils. So if I go ahead now, I'm doing a smooth pursuit to the right, and now but my head wants to go that way, right? Because I look there. So how do I hold my head still? Well, the right floccular has to step in, deactivate it to make sure I don't move my head. Same thing with the left. So I'm moving my eyes to the left. My flocculus has to deregulate so that I keep my head still. And it's really fascinating because you think of that cervical reflex in children as they move their head back and forth, and you think, we talk about what's called vestibular, cancellation, VOR cancellation, and you think we do that same with our neck, right? Because we move our neck back and forth. In other words, when I move my eyes, I'm holding my neck still, and so the point is the system goes both ways here, and we can isolate different areas of the brain and the function as we look at this, because it can be so precise because of the cerebellum. One interesting thing, a very fun thing to do on fixation maintenance is something called the Troxler phenomenon. If you look straight at that X, it takes about 20 seconds, but as you're looking at the X, the rest of it will disappear. That's a way that you can, self work with your fixation ability. And how much time I'm what?
About 5 minutes.
I have 5 minutes? I thought you said 4 minutes. Isn't that
For the first 15 minutes.
Oh
Now
my.
you're
Oh my gosh. Excuse me, I could go back here. Okay, so we'll slow down. Sorry about that. The fire hose was really on right there. The fire hose was on. Well, this is good. Thank you so much. I'm kind of worried. So let's think for a second. So sorry, I just thought I said that a few seconds. So fixation, remember, so we look as we can just hold that. Now, the other thing, we have something called the MIT. That's another way of doing this. Or a lot of the ocular machines now, for example, the right eye, allows you to know where your fixation is. It's a very important aspect, where to put our attention. When you think about kids with autism, what's the problem? They don't know where to put their attention. Developing visual attention and being able to hold your attention where you need to is so big. It's such a big deal. Okay, I'll slow down. So now we're going to go ahead and we're going to move our eyes down. And now we've got a gravity system associated with this. So we've got to go ahead, the right flocculus, I'm looking down to my left, the right flocculus is going to have to activate the anti-gravity and the canal system, unregulate to hold my head still. And same with this thing. So you get an idea, this gets really, we have all these different parameters that we can utilize to be precise in the stimulation that we can give our patients. And I think you're going to be doing this with they call this the carrot principle. But the most powerful thing of all is, you can now isolate this by saccades up to your left and pursuing down up to your right and pursuing down to your left, and you can isolate some very interesting patterns of the brain. Just some fascinating things, and people report after doing this of just a feeling of groundedness, and that stimulation makes a huge difference on how they do. Last thing, we're not going to spend a lot of time on this, the uvula, and that's that moving, walking, bobbing, weaving. Fascinating, the otolith is just a fascinating system you haven't talked about, you can consider. So here's one last question. You observe a patient walking with their left hip and left shoulder internally rotated, meaning that left cerebellum has got a problem. Remember, think of Parkinson. Anyway, so it's rotated, and you want to have some muscle stimulation to help that particular side, that left side cerebellum. So what would you do? Well, you're going to do a complex nonlinear movement on your left side while fixating to the left. In other words, as you're looking to the left, you're doing a complex activity that requires novelty, requires thought, and to do that again and again requires that activation of the cerebellum on that left side, and hopefully helping that patient be more grounded and moving on to other therapies. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and just just make a quick summary. So that FOR, think of that top of your mouth, right? The palate. Initial acceleration for smooth pursuits and mostly saccades, okay? The ophthalmologist, paraophthalmologist, think of your tonsils. Maintaining that fixation off to the side and maintaining pursuits for those optometrists here. That's the Marsden ball, keeping the ball in motion, right? Once it's started. And particularly if you have people sitting on the ground, then you take the otoliths out of the system. And then the last thing is the integration of the canals and otolith information, and that's the translational or movement VOR that we all use. Something called the velocity storage mechanism. That's when people get off a boat, why are they still going on and on? See, these things are all interconnected. And again, the idea that there's so many different ways of accelerating and decelerating that. I could give you some more information, but again, we don't have the time today. Let's go back to this initial premise. Immediate connection, right? In seconds, you do something with the cerebellum and you can change things. And that prediction can take place because of these great loops between the granule cells, the Purkinje cells that inhibit the nucleus, and again, these tremendous connections they have, direct connections. And the idea that the vestibular system is this valuable portal to get into neuroplastic states. We want to change ourselves. So using anti-gravity system or just, again, using the vestibular system with balance makes such a big difference on how we do. So if you want to change yourself, be on the edge, don't fall, be on the edge of falling, and that's going to drive your neuroplasticity. And so again, we like to use this neural system to drive plasticity. And here we go, Jam. Stole your stuff. So here's the thing that we go on. Again, eye movement tasks that require prediction, and the idea that the vestibular and the interconnection in the cerebellum for all of these things are all close looped in. So, and what's available? So the FDA, there's actually different eye movement things available that can actually assist. Because of the eye movements are so intimately associated with cerebellar function, they're connected. This is the eye box, the right eye, these been around, and then of course, Jam, and this is the one that I think is really exciting because it does the prediction start, is the eye-sync technology. So, and that whole idea is to measure predictability, the variability, because our eyes need to keep that image on the fovea. That's the whole reason why we have the eyes ahead and why we have to foveate on things. And that's why we have to have this elaborate eye movement system going on that's connected to our neck and our brain and our movement. And Jan's put together, again, there's some great algorithms, and this is all measurable with timing, spatial, and a lead and lag, and those who were here yesterday saw this. I think the key thing though is this lead and lag, this idea of always being too much ahead or behind, and this helps, again, these are signatures, these are biomarkers of not only brain injury, but so many other forms of attention. And so again, we got the fatigue and the injury. We think about this. I was just talking to a friend that's a CHP officer. What does the CHP want to do? They want to have people that have attention on the road, right? And right now that they've, there's all these people that are buzzed and stuff. How do you find out somebody that's buzzed? How do you tell if somebody's been not sleep deprived? All these things. It's just so important to do this. Let's see if that's going to work.
1 minute.
Okay, 1 minute. We'll go. So this is the cool thing. Again, there's metrics also in saccades, and also the connection with this, because you can't separate it. You've got to have, along with eye movements, you've got to have a VOR assessment. So there's a VOR assessment along with convergence. Convergence is the easy thing because it's painful often after a brain injury. So let's go back to this this comment by Dr. David Z. This new technology, for example, quantitative bedside videography, will assist in development of better diagnostic algorithms and novel treatments, including medications, rehabilitation programs that can take advantage of the central role of the cerebellum. Now, the rest of the brain's important, but the central role of the cerebellum in monitoring and adjusting to keep them active. And so my feeling would be that technology is here now. We just need to start utilizing it in our practices, really understand how we can have that precision, that power of precision stimulation, motor and sensory, for the benefit of our patients. It's so important, and so many good examples. Thank you so much for your attention.